The psychology of nations. Every country has a mind the flags waved as if they knew something the people didn't, a rhythm older than nations, moving beneath every decision. History unfolded like a dream that couldn't wake itself, repeating patterns the conscious mind refused to see. We speak of countries as if they were machines, strategies, borders, treaties, carved in logic. But beneath the surface, something else breathed. Something human, something terrifyingly familiar. Like most of us, entire civilizations chase safety, and in doing so, create the very chaos they fear. The fortress becomes the prison, the defense becomes the attack. The protector becomes what it protected against. Carl Jung once observed that nations have shadows to the traits they exile become their obsessions. What a culture denies in itself, it projects onto others. The enemy is rarely who we think it is. Consider America's relationship with freedom. A nation born from rebellion against tyranny became the world's largest surveillance apparatus. The land that promised escape built walls around the concept of escape itself. Was this hypocrisy or something deeper? What if the obsession with freedom revealed the deepest anxiety about control? What if proclaiming liberty loudest meant fearing captivity most? The pattern echoes across continents. Russia's hunger for security through expansion, seeking safety by making others feel unsafe. China's pursuit of harmony through rigid order, creating peace by eliminating the space for conflict. Europe's dream of unity while clutching ancient grudges like family heirlooms. Every nation acts out its unresolved psychology on the world stage. The treaty is therapy. The war is a nervous breakdown. The alliance is codependency, dressed in diplomatic language. But what if the Cold War wasn't just about power, but projection? Two nations staring at each other across an ideological mirror, each seeing in the other what it couldn't acknowledge in itself. The paranoia wasn't about the enemy's actions, it was about their own capacity for destruction. For a moment, imagine the map without borders, only patterns of fear and desire, shifting through time. The geography dissolves. What remains are archetypal forces, the need to belong, the terror of annihilation, the hunger for meaning, the compulsion to control what cannot be controlled. Nations, like people, develop personalities in response to trauma. Germany's obsessive ordering after the chaos of war. Japan's exquisite politeness, masking volcanic shame. Britain's nostalgic imperialism, the ghost of empire, haunting a smaller island, unable to let go of who it once was. These aren't metaphors. These are collective psychological patterns, as real as individual neuroses, passed down through generations, like inherited debt. The question isn't whether nations behave rationally, they don't, because people don't. The question is, whose rationality are we measuring? The conscious ideology or the unconscious drive? Was it strategy or collective denial? Maybe progress was never the goal, only repetition with better technology. The sword became the missile. The conquest became the trade agreement. The empire became the corporation. Different masks, same hunger. Social psychologists discovered something unsettling. Group behavior amplifies individual shadows. Put people in uniforms, give them flags, tell them stories about who they are. Suddenly the restraints of personal conscience dissolve into collective permission. Nationalism isn't just pride, it's the ego inflated to mythological scale. It's the individual's fear of insignificance solved by merging with something larger. I may be small, but we are eternal. The tribe offers immortality. The nation offers meaning. The flag offers belonging in exchange for one small thing, your capacity to see the other side as equally human. This mechanism, this psychological trade, has driven more history than any ideology ever could. We don't go to war over ideas. We go to war over identity. Over the terror that without the enemy, we might have to face ourselves. What surprised me most wasn't what I learned about collective psychology, but how journaling helped me observe patterns more clearly, not in nations, but in my own reactions to them. I wasn't expecting such clarity. And it reminded me that seeing the world differently always starts with seeing ourselves differently. This isn't a recommendation, just something that changed how I process information. I'll leave the link below if you want to explore what I mean. The Middle East carries the weight of being civilization's birthplace, the cradle that became a battleground, unable to escape the role history assigned. Every power that touches it projects their own unresolved complexities onto ancient sands. India and Pakistan, siblings locked in eternal rivalry, unable to forgive the divorce that created them. The partition wasn't just geographic. It was psychological amputation, and phantom limbs still ache across the border. Israel and Palestine, two peoples trapped in competing traumas, each using their suffering to justify the other's suffering. The cycle doesn't break because the cycle has become identity. Without the conflict, who would they be? Maybe progress was never linear. Maybe it spirals, returning to the same themes at different altitudes, learning slowly, forgetting faster. The European Union attempted something radical, to dissolve tribal boundaries through shared economics. To make war so impractical that peace became the only rational choice. But rationality battles instinct, and instinct remembers older borders. Brexit wasn't about trade policies. It was about the anxiety of losing distinctness, of dissolving into something larger, of no longer knowing where we ends and they begins. It was the ego's panic at the threat of merger. Breathe. History moves slower than headlines suggest. Beneath the noise, patterns emerge. Nations like individuals go through stages: birth, adolescence, maturity, decline. Some remain stuck in adolescent aggression, others enter premature decline, haunted by former glory. Few reach genuine maturity, the ability to hold complexity without collapsing into simplistic narratives. What if it wasn't conquest, but confession? What if every war was a nation admitting what it couldn't say in words, admitting its fear, its hunger, its unprocessed grief? The Treaty of Versailles planted World War II by humiliating Germany so thoroughly that vengeance became inevitable. The victors, drunk on righteousness, couldn't see they were creating their next enemy. Punishment without mercy breeds resentment without limit. This is the pattern. The oppressed becomes the oppressor. The colonized becomes the colonizer. The abused becomes the abuser. Not because people are evil, but because unhealed trauma demands reenactment. Watch how nations speak about themselves versus how they act. The gap between stated values and actual behavior, that gap is the shadow. That gap is where truth lives. America preaches democracy while supporting dictators. Russia speaks of sovereignty while invading neighbors. China promises harmony while surveilling citizens. Every nation's hypocrisy reveals its deepest fear. The more a nation preaches peace, the louder its weapons speak. The more it promises freedom, the more mechanisms of control it builds. The more it claims moral superiority, the more its actions contradict its words. This isn't cynicism, this is observation. The collective shadow operates exactly like the individual shadow. What we repress, we project. What we deny in ourselves, we attack in others. But here's the paradox. Awareness doesn't automatically change behavior. Knowing you're projecting doesn't stop projection. The pattern has momentum. It has institutional memory. It has economic incentives. It has generations of storytelling reinforcing it. Change requires more than insight. It requires metabolizing old traumas, grieving past identities, accepting what was lost. How many nations are capable of that? Germany, post-World War II, attempted it, facing its shadow directly, building monuments to its shame, teaching its children what not to become. Not perfectly, but genuinely. The result, a nation that leads through cooperation rather than domination. But Germany had no choice. Total defeat forced the confrontation. Most nations avoid that mirror until catastrophe makes it unavoidable. History repeats, not because we forget, but because we remember selectively. We remember our wounds, not our mistakes. We remember being victims, not perpetrators. We remember their crimes, not our own. Selective memory is the engine of endless conflict. Every side has its narrative. Every narrative is partially true. Every partial truth becomes total truth in the tribal mind. Somewhere between the wars, some people stopped seeing enemies and started seeing mirrors. Not many, never many, but enough to plant seeds of different possibility. What if national interests and human interests weren't opposites? What if security came from cooperation rather than domination? What if strength meant the capacity to be vulnerable, to admit wrong, to change course? These aren't utopian fantasies. These are practical necessities. Nuclear weapons made total war unwinnable. Climate crisis made borders irrelevant. Pandemics proved that safety is collective or non-existent. The old psychology tribal, the Hitoria, zero-sum no longer serves survival, but the new psychology hasn't fully emerged. We're caught between paradigms, acting from old instincts in a new reality. The question isn't whether nations will change. The question is whether they'll change before the consequences become irreversible. Notice how the conversation shifted. We started discussing nations, but really we're discussing ourselves, our fear, our tribalism, our inability to hold complexity. Nations are just us, scaled up, with better weapons and worse therapy. Every criticism of national behavior is a criticism of human nature. Every geopolitical pattern reflects individual psychology. The border between personal and political dissolves when you see the pattern clearly enough. This is why changing the world requires changing ourselves. Not as cliché, but as practical necessity. The nation is made of individuals. The individual carries the nation. The cycle continues until someone, somewhere, breaks their part of it. You can't control national policy, but you can observe your own projections. You can notice when you dehumanize others to feel safe. You can catch yourself repeating tribal patterns. You can choose, in small moments, to see complexity instead of simplicity. This won't stop wars, but it shifts the field slightly. And fields shift wars eventually. The flags still wave, but now we see them differently. They were never about nations, only about the mind's need for meaning, for belonging, for immortality through collective myth. Behind every flag stands a person who needs to believe they're part of something larger than their brief existence. That need is beautiful, that need is dangerous. That need is profoundly human. Understanding this doesn't solve anything, but it changes the quality of how we engage. It replaces certainty with curiosity. It replaces judgment with observation. It replaces reaction with reflection. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's how large-scale change actually happens, not through grand revolutions, but through millions of small shifts in perception, accumulating slowly across generations. Or maybe not. Maybe we're doomed to repeat until we destroy ourselves. Maybe awareness is insufficient against the momentum of history. But then again, you're still here, still listening, still willing to question the stories you've been told about enemies and borders and who deserves what. That willingness is rare. That willingness is the crack where light enters. What part of this story made you rethink how we see power and how power sees us? Tell us where you're watching from. If this made you think differently, you've already joined the shadow. See you in the next video. Bye.